him, and but people like Yeats had no idea why he is being praised. So for the first time, actually, they get to see who this man is when he brings his own translations along in 1912 visit. So let's look further at this.
Let's look at the slide. Gitanjali is a slender volume. It was published in 1913 with a preface by W.B. Yeats, a major poet, 20th century major poet, and in the same year, based on a corpus of translations, Rabindranath became the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize. Correct?
Yeah, that's very interesting. He is the first non-European to win Nobel Prize, and people like Yeats and not Ezra Pound, but Yeats had already won Nobel Prize. So he is a very important name in the history of world literature also, because he is the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize.
Correct. Let's look at the other slide.
Yeah.
Gitanjali in Bengali is also the title of an earlier Bengali volume published in 1910 of 157 mostly devotional songs. The word Gitanjali is composed from the word Git, means song, and word Anjali means offering, and thus means and collect an offering of songs. The word for offering Anjali has a strong devotional connotation, so the title may also be interpreted as prayer offering of song. The English collection is not a translation of poem from Bengali volume of the same name. Correct, na?
Yeah. So it's not a translation of the entire book, but what Tagore has done, as we'll look in the next slide, what Tagore has really done, that he has selected only half of the song from the Bengali collection called Gitanjali. He has taken 52 out of 103 songs, and other songs are taken from his other collection like Giti Mallo in 1914, Nobedyo in 1901, Kia, and some other works. So it's a kind of selection from many other collections. So though its name is Gitanjali, it's not a direct translation of the text by the same name. So that is what I think we should bear in mind when we look at Gitanjali as a translation of Bengali poems.
Correct. The translations were often radical, leaving out or altering large chunks of the poem, and in one instance even fusing two separate poems, Song 95, which unifies Song 89 and 90 of Naivedya. I think many a times he has done such things.
Yes. So his own translations, Pankti, are not faithful renderings of his originals. Being the poet himself, his translation, he has taken a lot of liberties to alter, change, modify, fuse two poems into one. Now this is a very strange thing to do, because we might get an impression that he is actually giving a faithful rendering of his Bengali works, but he is not. So what he is doing is he is transcreating, or he is giving a creative rewriting of his own works rather than producing a faithful literal translation.
Correct. So many poets have done such things.
Yes.
Right. Let us look at the other slide. I think now we'll directly deal with the analysis of poems.
Yeah.
What I will do, I will first read out the poem and you will provide the analysis of the particular poem.
Fine.
Correct?
Yeah.
So,
but before we look into poem, we can also just summarize what we have done. So students who are paying attention, what we have done is we have given a background to Tagore's life. We have seen him as a poet who is representative of colonial period, where Indian and native traditions, creative and intellectual, come together in one man. In his own creative genius, there is a fusion of two kinds of intellectual traditions, and he is a typical 19th century poet who has had great influence on all poetry of India. Then we have also seen background to his works and his life. We have seen how he was a painter and a musician of high order. He was an educationist. So we have to bear this in mind, that he was a painter and a musician, because Gitanjali is both music and it's also painting.
Correct. Let us look at the slide and some of his poems. First we'll take poem number 72, which deals with the theme of God as lover and God living within. Dr. Ketkar, I'll read out the poem. Right? Life of my life, I shall ever try to keep my body pure, knowing that thy living touch is upon all my limbs. I shall ever try to keep all untruths out from my thoughts, knowing that thou art that truth which has kindled the light of reason in my mind. Okay. I shall ever try to drive all evils away from my heart and keep my love in flower, knowing that thou hast thy seat in the innermost shrine of my heart. And it shall be my endeavor to reveal thee in my action, knowing it is thy power gives me strength to act.
It's a very philosophical and it's a devotional poem. If you look at it, he is addressing divine, the God, as somebody who resides in your heart, somebody who is not outside, right? So he is calling him life of my life. At the same time, he is calling God as somebody who lives within his heart, as antaryami, as we say, and how it's duty of the poet to reveal the divine through his activity. So poetry becomes a kind of devotional activity. So devotion and creative writing are not seen as something two distinct activities, right? It's kind of duty of a poet to reveal God in his activity, right? So
Right.
that's a very profound comment which he makes.
Let us look at another poem. Poem number 69. The theme of oneness with nature and nature as embodiment of divine. Influence of, mostly you will see the influence of English Romanticism on this poem.
Right. So you can see how English Romanticism and native Bhakti traditions come together in same kind of same spirit and same expression. So it seems like it's a hybrid kind of sensibility, but at the same time you can see that they are not so incompatible. They are very close in their spirit to each other. So let's
Right.
read this poem. It's a very interesting one.
Yes, let's look at the slide. The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth and numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and of death in ebb and in flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages dancing in my blood this moment.
He compares he expresses union with his self and nature. The blood which is flowing through his veins, Pankti, is also the same life force which is flowing through trees, through leaves, through grass, through everywhere in nature. So he says that the both spirit of nature and spirit of human being, the self, is one in this poem. So this is an expression of Advaita at the level of the world, right? For Tagore, Advaita doesn't mean rejection of world or rejection of nature or rejection of life. In fact, it's Advaita which is inside of life. It is never life rejecting. In fact, it is life affirming. That's
And
very
at the
important.
same time, when he has translated, most the translations are prosaic, whereas the romantic poems were quite lyrical, and must be his original Bengali poems must be. It is quite lyrical, right?
Yeah,
Because most
they are
of
songs.
the
They are
songs.
songs to
But
tune.
when it is translated, it is mostly prosaic.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment to make, Pankti. These are songs and he has translated them into free words, and the style of free words resembles free words of Bible and even Walt Whitman at times, whom we talked about in our previous lecture. Walt Whitman kind of free words which is flowing and going on to the length, talking about oneness with nature. So you can find Walt Whitman's sensibility and Tagore's sensibility. More or less they were contemporaries probably.
Right.
Tagore came slightly late, but at the same time they are similar in spite of living in very different cultures in America and in India.
Correct. Now let us look at another poem.
Yeah.
Let us look at the slide. Poem number 7. Theme of creativity as Bhakti and God as Master Creator. My song has put off her adornments. She has no pride of dress and decoration. Ornaments would mar our union. They would come between thee and me. Their jingling would drown thy whispers. My poet's vanity dies in shame before thy sight. O master poet, I have sat down at thy feet. Only let me make my life simple and straight, like a flute of reed for thee to fill with music.
It's a very beautiful song which expresses a kind of metaphor between a kind of analogy between song and a lover going to meet his beloved, and it's also a comparison of soul going to meet the divine. So it's a
Right.
kind of allegory, but the song is an expression of Tagore's creativity. So
Correct.
creativity, human soul, and lover meeting her beloved, all three come together in expression of a single poem. So it's a very allegorical and metaphorical expression. And if you look at the poem closely, then he says that his poems, his poetry, his songs has no pride in dress or decorations, and he has actually kept all his ornaments aside. He has kept all the ornaments, alankar as we say, and alankar as figure of speech, the artifice of poetry. So he says that I am abandoning artifice of my poetry, making my poems natural so that they come to you as your devotees without any show, right? And so it becomes an act of humility, and that's why the title of the collection, Gitanjali, it's an act of humility. It's offering. The songs are offered to the divine, and songs are again compared to lover going to meet the divine. So it's very interesting to look at this comparison, and it reminds us of songs or songs of Solomon on one hand. It also reminds us of Jayadev's Geet Govind, which is again a kind of devotional and erotic love for the divine. So
Correct.
eroticism, love, and creativity seems to come together in this poem. So it's a very interesting poem.
Right. Shall we look at the next poem?
Yeah.
Right. Let us look at the slide. Poem number 8, Theme of Freedom from Material Bondage. The child who is decked with prince's robes and who has jeweled chains round his neck loses all pleasure in his play. His dress hampers him at every step. In fear that it may be frayed or stained with dust, he keeps himself from the world and is afraid even to move. Mother, it is no gain, thy bondage of finery, if it keeps one shut off from the healthful dust of the earth, if it rob one of the right of entrance to the great fair of common human life.
Interesting thing about this poem, it combines Tagore's view of bhakti and devotion, which is different from, say for example, spiritual or other practices which ask us to leave life behind, right? To live as tyag, right? To live, to give up in renunciation. For Tagore, bhakti is not renunciation, right? But at the same time, he sees that these material things, these clothes that people have to wear, this finery which he is addressing as a child to mother, and the image here is no longer that of a lover and beloved, but child and mother. And you can see that it's the image of child and mother becomes another figure of speech for relationship between divine and the devotee. And poet seems to be saying here that the material things are actually discomfort. They come between natural life and you. So wealth and material things are no longer seen as evil, but at the same time they are seen as something that comes between the life and the
love.
and love and the poet. So it seems to be something, he compares this material wealth with child who is decked with princess robe. So princess robes are very heavy, expensive, and child is always conscious of it, trying to see that it doesn't get stained or torn. And so these princess robes actually does no good for the child who wants to go out and play in earth. So this is the comparison between material wealth, devotee, and God, this kind of relationship that it comes out. So again, very interesting thing about this is he is addressing mother, and Kali is a very important deity in Bengal. So the songs addressed to mother also have a special significance in Tagore's poetry. It means your mother is something that is which many Bengalis could identify themselves with.
Yeah.
The whole idea of mother and son.
Correct. Now let us look at the
Let's look at the next
poem. That is Theme of Freedom from Ego. Poem number 29. He whom I enclose with my name is weeping in this dungeon. I am ever busy building this wall all around, and as this wall goes up into the sky day by day, I lost sight of my true being in its dark shadow. I take pride in this great wall, and I plaster it with dust and sand, lest a least hole should be left in this name, and for all the care I take, I lost sight of my true being. Yes.
This is a very philosophical poem again. It expresses the idea that ego, the human identity,
Yes.
and human being are two different things. The being of a true being and identity actually seem to be at loggerheads here, in the sense that it locks off true being into a narrow walls. And who is responsible for creating walls around us is our ego.
Yes.
So we wall ourselves in the ego, and what happens that our true being remains in the shadow of that ego. So there is a great suffocation and suffering, misery which takes place because of the ego. And what I want to talk about is the theme of freedom also is a very important theme in Gitanjali. Freedom from material bondage, freedom from ego, which is the freedom of all freedoms, right? And freedom, as we will see in other poems, freedom for the nation also. So freedom, love, devotion, these are important themes in Gitanjali.
Correct.
So let's look at the
At that
imagery
theme.
here. Yeah.
Yes.
That he imagines that because
He's
of
in the
ego he is in
dungeon.
dungeon. He is in the darkness,
And
the
he
dark
is
shadow.
weeping.
Right. And
Right.
he has